Let's now look at Courtney Aviation Services Limited. These are the managers of the airport in Lagos here. Do you see why certain eyebrows are raised, concerns raised as to whether or not this gives the airport infrastructure a facelift? We're looking at having world-class standards, yet it's a far cry from that. We're worlds apart when you look at the standard of the airport in Lagos, which has a whole lot of reception of aircraft and individuals coming in versus other developing nations. Do you see why people are raising concerns here? Using Courtney as an example, how do you see the management with the involvement of a private entity?
Well, I mean, yes, the Courtney, even though the Courtney story is...
it's a unique one.
It's a unique one, and, you know, might be seen to be contempt of the court, since the fan has a pending case with Courtney. But, I mean...
But over the years,
I would talk from a user experience point of view. Being an airport user myself, even though I'm an industry participant, you could see the difference between the Courtney operated airports and the fan operated airports. You would see that, I mean, with private sector, there is a bit more of innovation. There's a bit more of, you know, the management is there, the management can be seen. You could see that the airport is profit driven. So, I mean, yes, it's a huge gap, to be honest, comparing the Nigerian airports with any airports in Europe or America. But
that of Accra?
Well, yes, even that of Accra. But David, this is actually the first step in the right direction. You know, government has to let go.
Now, we're sharing personal experiences here. So about a month ago, I had to drop my parent at the airport doing an international trip. And one of the disturbing experiences was the fact that despite the ECC taking up works at the terminal there, it was quite a hassle to have to maneuver through Nodon Park there. You would have to need a trolley, carry your load by hand and your luggage by hand and a whole lot more. Why is the story different here in Lagos from that of what we have in Abuja and also Port Harcourt? Let's do some comparative analysis of what's happening in Lagos and in Kano airport terminals versus Abuja as well as Port Harcourt.
Yeah, I mean, passenger density, that's a simple answer to that. The Lagos airport was not designed for the current passenger capacity that it's experiencing. And it has not, you know, been expanded over the years. There has not been any, you know, solid investment into it.
Do you think funding is the major challenge?
Of course. The airport's it is not just a huge investment. It takes a long time to recover. So, and in this current space and time where government has a lot of competing needs, you know, it will be difficult for the government to you know, source for and, you know, provide the right funding required to, you know, make these airports global competitors. But as I said, private funding is the way. Not just private funding, private management is also the way.
But how disappointing would you say this is now that we have airports that are not designed within the scope of international aviation hubs, but just operate separate international and then domestic terminals? What fuels this?
Airports are living structures. I mean, airports are, by design, an airport is meant to undergo what we call periodized growth. You know, the investment in expansion is supposed to be futuristic. You know, you don't build an airport based on current capacity.
Is there any element of futuristic
well, currently
Lagos
with the current structure? You know, and I must say something, David. The airports have, if you look at Nigeria, the Nigerian airlines, and why the Nigerian airlines have not survived, you could plot a direct intersection between the airports and the unviability of the airlines. The airports are just not designed to support the playbooks of Nigerian airlines. So, I mean, David, I can say it again and again, concessioning, privatization, whatever we choose to call it, that's just the way forward.
How quick would you want to see us also getting the plow working in terms of this modernization agenda of our airports? We look at our runway maintenance, that's one issue. Navigational aids, that's another issue. Terminal facilities as a whole, that's an issue. We have the extension as well from Emirates still insisting until we have testing facilities at the airport, we likely would not see any direct flight from Lagos to Dubai.
Well, I mean, the Emirates issue, I think it's aeropoliticking. there's really no data that supports the decision by the Emirati government to suspend flights, direct flights into Nigeria. I mean, looking at the infection rates, we've had this conversation over and over. But nonetheless, I hear you, but the truth is this. It cannot happen as soon as we want it, because regardless of government's playbook, you still have to talk about, you know, employee disengagement. You have a lot of people working for our brothers and colleagues working for the likes of FAN, you know. So it's there's going to be a lot of engagement, you know, what happens to them, what happens to their pension, what kind of payoff, you know. So these are all of the issues I believe government, you know, are juggling with. And then also you have to also deal with the issue of trust, David. People are not trusting anymore.
There's a whole lot of deficits there.
Yeah.
And also looking at the fact that we also approaching the Harmattan season now, navigational aids, that's also one major challenge as well for domestic travel. How do you see this also panning out this year?
There has been some improvement, David. I mean, Lagos, Abuja, Port Harcourt, Kano have seen investments in improved instrument landing systems. I believe the airlines, as the body of airlines, would actually see the benefits come the Harmattan season, where we would require to you know, operate into airports with low visibility.
I'd like to share your optimism and do a short travel here, but now looking at the bigger picture of aviation, now we see certain reports that say, well, we are not likely to see as much passenger travel demand like we've seen prior to the COVID-19. You have already had your stance. 2019 is almost the best year we've had in aviation. Hence, doing any comparative analysis with 2019 isn't a fair deal. But gradually opening up, what do you see playing out in terms of travel demand? Insecurity, now we see rail transport also threatened, hence so many will still rely heavily on air transport. That's now the most secure. Do you see this also fueling the passenger numbers we'll likely see wrapping up the year for this quarter?
Absolutely. I mean, if you're speaking about locally,
locally,
I mean,
yes,
looking at our huge geographical footprints, you know, as a country, you would see that from Sokoto to Ibadan, from Ibadan to Maiduguri, from Maiduguri to Calabar, you know, Nigeria actually has, you know, fertile ground for aviation. So with the insecurities, you know, I mean, the deficits, infrastructural deficits, the insecurities as we know it, aviation is more or less the sure bet to get to where you want to go to. Plus, Nigerians are, you know, nomads within Nigeria. Nigerians are always traveling, and everybody goes back home in December, David, and yeah, we can.
So naturally, we'll just see a spike there.
Absolutely.
A favorable twist.
Absolutely.
Now, we also know there are new entrants, new aviation players. You see new aircraft as well, smaller size aircraft. We're seeing some adjustments. It's necessary to adjust to the tides we have as at now. But going by the curveball of COVID-19 financing and then the agenda of having a national carrier as well, it seems the Minister sort of has penned that agenda for now, looking at having a national carrier. We look at the performance of Arik Aero and a couple of others. How do you see these entities still hold funding base or performances that can hold some level of water? So many airlines are complaining.
Yeah, funding has been the major issue, David. Aviation is a long-term investment, and in Nigeria, we don't have long-term funds. That's just the truth. Airlines have had issues with using conventional bank lending instruments to fund their operations, which has come back to bite them, because you have high interest rates, short repayment periods. It doesn't pan out. So, well, there has been talk about a Nigerian leasing company set up by the Nigerian government that would more or less de-risk the transaction and be able to, you know, provide the funding for the airlines to purchase, you know, modern airplanes and at favorable interest rates.
I know why you're smiling.
Yeah. So, but I mean, funding has always been an issue traditionally, David. But yeah, the government also did something which we must give some credit to. I mean, post-COVID, I mean, we saw the CBN give loans with interest rates as low as 5 to 7%. And
don't you think that's just a drop of water in the mighty ocean?
Well, yes, David. Aviation is expensive. Aviation is expensive. But I mean, one airplane, David. You can imagine what the cost of one airplane would
actually.
It's.
And do you also see this also now translating to tickets costs?
Yes. I mean, there are macroeconomic factors, David. You have a slip in the exchange rate. You have inflation at the same time, and there is no business plan that can hedge for this kind of uptick in headline costs.
So simply put, are you saying that we're not likely going to see cost-cutting measures or a drop in the cost of traveling by air?
I don't see it happening anytime soon, to be honest. You know, the exchange rate is still very volatile. You know, year on year, we are seeing anything between 15 and 20% slide in the exchange rate between the US dollar and Naira, of course. So it's tough to see the prices coming down, to be honest. I mean, I don't see the macroeconomic indicators that will, you know,
how do you also see us propping up now the aviation space for Nigeria? We've had this conversation before, whether or not we are preparing ourselves as a hub to take advantage of any other forecast or prospect that is coming post-COVID-19. Do you see us having enough cushion to prepare ahead of any other curveball or shock? And what are the likely mistakes you think we'll make in not setting our footings right to be able to ensure that we have our tap-ins well-footed into the next big break for aviation? It's been a whole lot of bleeding, and hence we have to cling on to any cash cow whatsoever. How do you see us propping up ourselves to have all of those wins in the coming years? Say 2023, 2026, how do you see Nigeria positioning?
Any airline that came out of the COVID-19 shutdown, David,
has done well.
Has done very
tremendously well.
And I don't see what else they could experience that would you know, make them go under. That was the toughest period ever. So, I mean, what is important is that institutional memory is retained. You know, airlines have now gone into looking at their playbook, looking at their work streams, looking at their entire, you know, playbook, David. If you came out of COVID-19 and really, to be honest, I don't see what else could happen in the future that could...
There's no bigger shock.
There's no bigger shock than that. So, but you're right. It's definitely something that people would have to incorporate into their management style. Airlines will have to be a little bit more futuristic, innovative, you know, cost cutting, whatever is waste, you know, you let it go. And I've seen a lot of people, we're seeing new airlines coming in with you know, modern airplanes, you know, we're seeing right-sized fleets, you know, for the first time in history. And David, these are good signs coming to Nigeria.
And also looking at the fact that we had one of the biggest hits as well, we had a whole lot of job cuts, furloughs, and a whole lot more. Do you see this recovery also having that bounce back in terms of the cabin crew?
Well, yes. I mean, with more airplanes, the rule of thumb is with more airplanes, you have more crew. So the rebound is here, David.
But is it not better to keep your crew slim so that you can then propel yourself at a faster pace over a shorter period of time?
Well, true, but there are regulatory minimums, you know. You have to look at crew fatigue, you have to look at crew composition for airplanes. So there are regulatory minimums required to operate any number of airplanes. So rule of thumb is the more airplanes you add, it's simple, the more staff, ground and flights that you add to the family. So yes, this is what we hope for, David. We hope for new entrants. We need to create a buzz in this industry, David.
We definitely need to create a buzz. But just before I let you go now, let's still look at the protocol we have around the COVID-19. Do you still see us maintaining the most stringent of efforts? Our stance is quite questionable. We've had issues of the QR codes not being accessible, and then we had to tell the international community just to take our travelers in. They can't remain stuck. We've had complaints of people saying they're paying to individuals or entities at the airports for the COVID, the PCR test, and they're not necessarily seeing where these monies are going to. These, the body language does not just speak well, but in terms of safety now, do you still see us clinging tightly to the safety protocols and ensuring that airlines maintain all of these to ensure that we don't necessarily give any room for any new variant, so to speak, or any shock that would also take us back in terms of new disruptions in terms of the COVID-19?
Yes, the Civil Aviation Authority has been really, they championed this, it's called the public health corridor concept, which was, brought about by the ICAO. But the Civil Aviation Authority of Nigeria was one of the very few foremost civil aviation authorities that domesticated and ratified this protocol in country. And we've seen a lot of adoption. We've seen a lot of oversight. And it's more or less now like muscle memory. Is what people, you just know it. You see it. Nobody needs to tell you. You don't need to wait for a civil aviation inspector to come and tell you to put on your mask. It's more or less more than a checklist item right now. And from a safety point of view, I'm not just an industry participant, but I'm also a heavy user as well of the service.
So we have a working blueprint?
Yes, we have guidelines that are adopted into all the standard operating procedures of every single airline that is operating today post-COVID. So it is there. It is always revised to the current realities. But the oversight is there, David. I can tell you that.
Well, thank you very much for joining us live here in our Lagos studio and discussing aviation today. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, Chukwuerika Achum. We've been speaking with the Chief Operating Officer of Jet Support Services Limited. And then we'll definitely also keep our fingers crossed as to see what new wind we'll have from the Minister of Aviation. It's definitely a tough time to maneuver through and also have policies that will help stimulate. Hence, we keep our fingers crossed.
Thank you very
once
much
again.
Thank you for having me, David.